They had their entire lives ahead of them.
His company, Defense Distributed.
Birthdays, graduations.
Federal judge's order to block access to the files.
Weddings.
Producing plastic firearms using 3D printers.
Kids of their own.
How's that national conversation going?
While studying law at the University of Texas, Cody was determined to accomplish something meaningful in his spare time. He explored a number of potential projects to undertake before finally landing on the idea of arms manufacturing. It was a culturally divisive topic, but there was nothing special about making and selling guns. He would need a unique angle. One of his associates suggested 3D printing, and while Cody loved the innovation, they'd likely spend time and effort designing a plastic gun just for the files to be leaked online. The potential for piracy threatened the idea as a sales product, so instead of selling firearms, they would publish them online, making guns freely available to anyone with internet access. They named it the Wiki Weapon, inspired by WikiLeaks.org, a website famously dedicated to leaking sensitive information to the public domain. Cody began by setting up an organization, Defense Distributed. After that, he set up a crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo with a goal of $20,000. Half the money raised would fund a Stratasys 3D printer, while the other half would go towards the development of design files. Using radio broadcasting, emailing lists, and social media, he urged people to assist him, either by donating or just sharing their expertise. As crowdfunding slowly edged past $1,000, he received a call from Forbes journalist Andy Greenberg. Cody jumped at the opportunity. Surely the exposure of a Forbes article was more than enough to reach his monetary goal. But before the donations could pile in, Indiegogo pulled the campaign. They didn't want to be associated with something so controversial. Amused by the irony of the campaign being silenced, Cody added PayPal and Bitcoin buttons to his website and watched as the donations once again trickled in. It was only a momentary setback, as the Forbes article drew the attention of Brent and Jackson, two Texan men passionate about guns and familiar with 3D printing. They invited Cody to their premises, where they proudly showed off their printer, a Stratasys object worth nearly $250,000. Cody politely admired it, but by that point, he had already signed a lease for his own Stratasys printer. He didn't need their hardware. What he needed was guidance in 3D modeling, to design blueprints for a plastic gun that wouldn't explode when fired. With Cody recently brushing up on ballistics, and Brent and Jackson's basic knowledge of 3D modeling, they sat to sketch out potential plans. After hours navigating and gaining a slightly clearer understanding of what the project entailed, Cody drove home, and before passing out, he checked his emails. He had been contacted by Amir Taki, asking him to come to London and speak publicly about Defense Distributed. Amir was heavily involved in Bitcoin, a decentralized currency designed to subvert state control. With their views clearly aligned, Cody agreed to attend. Making the most of his time, Cody spent the flight researching and responding to emails. One message asking if he was selling the plans, another offering advice on how to make millions from it. Cody fired back. It's not about guns or profits. It's about reinstating the freedom of information. He met Amir at the London conference, who promptly escorted him up on stage. While it was good practice in public speaking, the British-dominated crowd were unmoved by his words. His audience weren't in the habit of debating gun control, so they just endured it, waiting for the next speaker to take his place on stage. Cody returned home from London to find boxes of printer parts waiting for him, but his excitement was diluted. Between his law degree, travelling, and getting Defense Distributed off the ground, he was left too stressed to assemble the printer. Days passed, and before he opened a single box, he received a call from Stratasys, asking when they could pick up the printer. Left confused, he suggested the caller had the wrong client's number. Is this not Cody Wilson? Yeah, but he had only just gotten the printer. A couple days pass, and Cody receives official correspondence from Stratasys. They claimed he leased the printer without disclosing his intent to manufacture firearms, and there was no evidence to suggest he had the appropriate license to do so. Cody clapped back, He was producing a prototype for a project, not manufacturing for distribution, and therefore didn't require a license. Stratasys had no intention of arguing laws or opinions. They saw what Cody was doing was at best legally ambiguous. The repossession was quick, since the parts never left their boxes. Cody took the only option he could, recording the repossession and posting it online.
For the record, I was trying to print guns with that printer. Oh, that's cool.
It was never going to be an easy ride, but losing his printer was a huge setback, one that influenced Cody to get a deeper understanding of the laws surrounding firearms. He visited the ATF, the bureau responsible for laws surrounding firearms, but upon arrival, he was escorted into a back office where officers would interrogate him. Stratasys had filed a formal complaint. Cody was outraged. He had endured a lengthy process to lease the printer, with Defense Distributed's goal as public information. Stratasys processed it, cancelled it, and filed a formal complaint. Managing to convince the ATF officers that he wanted to abide by the law, they provided him with copious documentation to look over. Meanwhile, the video of the repossession was making waves online, and New York Times journalist Nick Bilton reached out. In his article, Bilton highlighted how homemade guns aren't new, but now without the need for skill or knowledge, anyone could hit print and be in possession of an unregistered firearm. Then suggesting after committing a crime with a printed weapon, a person could just melt it down and reprint it as something innocuous, overwriting key evidence. Bilton's article then goes on to talk about Michael Guslick, a man who successfully test-fired a homemade weapon whose lower receiver was made with the exact same material found in Lego. Guslick then uploaded that file to Thingiverse, a website dedicated to the sharing of digital design files. Finally, Cody had something to work with. The Times article brought more eyes to the project, and a man named Daniel Fisher reached out. He was a gun enthusiast starting a firearms business, and was willing to help Cody in any way possible. Soon enough, Daniel would get his very own federal firearms license, a license Cody would need if he wanted to avoid any future interrogations. Daniel happily educated him on the relatively simple process. After detailing the requirements, it was clear where Cody was falling short. He needed a registered fixed location that complied with local zoning laws. One quick phone call to Brent and Jackson, and that box was ticked. He would rent a portion of their premises with the added bonus of access to their printer. After some back and forth online, Cody traveled 70 miles west to a ranch in Fredericksburg where he would meet Daniel. Daniel pulled out a rifle, stripping it down to its lower receiver and educating Cody. The lower receiver is a critical component of a firearm. It contains the necessary components for the firing mechanism and is where the serial number and other identifying marks are engraved or stamped. It's legally considered the firearm itself, and is the only regulated part of a gun. If you printed a lower receiver at home, in many US states you could obtain all other parts to a gun without the need for background checks or even identification. Taking full advantage of his hospitality, Cody asked if he could carry out test shooting at Daniel's ranch. Given the thumbs up, Cody contacted Brent and Jackson to begin printing their modified version of Guslick's lower receiver. As the hours passed, the precision machinery added layer upon layer of bright green plastic, producing Defense Distributed's first bit of tangible progress. Cody picked up the luminous piece of bespoke plastic, secured it in a hard case, and once again set out for Fredericksburg. Upon arrival, Daniel gathered spare parts, before threading and filing down the printed piece until the rest of the gun fit into place. Daniel took aim down the sights. 5 successful shots and a 6th misfire reduced the gun to its parts. It was a major success. Yes, the gun destroyed itself, but they had fired bullets using a 3D printed component. The plastic receiver had survived the combustion of a gun, a feat many said was outright impossible. With videos of testing hitting the internet, the story was carried heavily by those opposing it, responding with humorous criticism, undermining Cody's progress by labeling the Wiki Weapon a 6-shooter. As he sat down for a 5-hour exam, Cody received a text from Forbes journalist Andy Greenberg. Will this affect Defense Distributed's plans? A concerning message, but a concern he'd have to force to the back of his mind for now. After his law exam finished, the news was inescapable, every screen begging his attention. Breaking news overlaid aerial footage of an elementary school. 26 lives were taken in the Sandy Hook massacre, 20 of which were 6 and 7 years old. It was the 16th mass shooting of 2012, setting a record high amount in a single year, and igniting a huge debate on gun control.
We're going to have to come together and take meaningful action.
Gun never shot anybody on its own.
A debate that presented a new set of challenges for Defense Distributed, but also opportunity. The push to regulate firearms was inevitable, and while regulations would make it increasingly difficult to publish the Wiki Weapon in accordance with the law, those same regulations also bolstered the political message Defense Distributed was attempting to spread. While Congress debated the right to own particular guns, Defense Distributed argued that those in power shouldn't control the flow of information available to you. Access to information was your constitutional right, even if that information included the blueprints to a deadly weapon. Still, action was taken. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo signed the SAFE Act. It was, as he claims, the toughest gun control law in the United States. Amongst other things, the act banned the sale of magazines with a capacity higher than 10 rounds. The idea being that limited ammunition would lead to a limit of future casualties. Cody scheduled to meet with Brian Bauman, a follower of Defense Distributed with access to an industrial 3D printer. He had read up on Cody's methods of printing, and reached out to suggest a sturdier approach. After the advanced lesson in 3D printing, explaining the differences between FDM, SLA, and SLS, Brian showed off his giant printer. Over time, with Brian's expertise and advice, the 6-shooter Wiki Weapon was now capable of firing 100 rounds before failure. Hugely satisfied with the lower receiver, Cody asked if they could start printing magazines. Wrapping up on a day of test shooting, Cody checked his emails, the first of which was from Guslick. Thingiverse had apparently stripped everything gun-related off their website. Cody was unsurprised. First Indiegogo, then Stratasys, and now Thingiverse. Private companies had a habit of distancing themselves from controversy, even if it meant trading the freedom of information, the very thing Cody was fighting for. In response, Cody created DEFCAD, a website where anyone can download files for printable guns. No longer would his or anyone else's blueprints be at the mercy of private companies looking to maintain their reputation. The other email was from John, whose surname is undisclosed. John had responded to a tweet. Apparently Cody expressed interest in measuring ballistics, something he couldn't recall tweeting. Cody instead mentioned his desire to create a pistol, a single printable gun not reliant on anything other than a printer and its materials. John was more than interested. They organized to go shooting together and test out Defense Distributed's first attempt at a 3D printed magazine. Cody picked up John and headed south for a ranch in Lockhart. Popping his trunk, Cody revealed 2 high-capacity plastic magazines, the first of which broke almost instantly. The second shot perfectly, until they switched from semi-auto to automatic fire, at which point it would jam after each round was fired. Cody was frustrated, but John remained calm and analytical, determined to find the problem, and thus a solution. They returned to the shooting gallery the next day, with a camera and a newly printed mag, this time loading it with graphite for extra lubrication. After successfully firing off 30 rounds, he published the mag on DEFCAD, naming it the Cuomo, provoking the governor who banned high-capacity magazines in the first place. During the Second World War, the CIA's predecessor commissioned a small metal pistol designed to fire a single 45 round. The idea was to airdrop them to resistance fighters in Nazi-occupied territories, along with instructions on how to place it at the base of a soldier's skull, pull the trigger, and adopt his rifle. They called it the Liberator, but the project was never finished. With the lower receivers and high-capacity magazines designed and now available on DEFCAD, Cody decided it was time to drop the Liberator. Only this time, instead of dropping it from the sky, it would be uploaded to the cloud. accessible to anyone with internet access. When the news of his plans broke, New York Governor Steve Israel took direct aim at the Liberator, proposing the renewal of the Undetectable Firearms Act, banning any firearm that doesn't contain enough metal to trigger a metal detector. Cody, with the help of a law professor he knew from University of Texas, took a detailed look at the UFA, and they found a caveat. With his federal firearms license, Cody was able to manufacture the Liberator for testing. The act then only affected people who were manufacturing undetectable firearms. Uploading and downloading the files were still perfectly legal, and since printing could be done offline, it would be very difficult to catch anyone manufacturing the Liberator. In reality, the renewed UFA did nothing to Cody's movement. Cut to the warehouse, where Cody and John are looking down at 16 parts that, when assembled, make the first fully printed pistol. After picking up Andy Greenberg, they headed to the Lockhart Ranch, as they had done countless times before. Only this time, instead of holding a gun, Cody held the end of a 20-foot long piece of string, the other end of which was attached to the first ever fully assembled Liberator. John gave a count.
All right, 1, 2.
3 was never heard. It was drowned out by the successful sound of shrapnel, followed by silence. Andy asked Cody why he didn't seem elated, reason being, this was only the rehearsal. He'd have to do it all again the next day, this time with the BBC in attendance. The BBC journalist asked if he could run them through the assembly process, and Cody obliged. First of all, the pistol isn't just one singular file. It's made up of 15 separate prints, and you can carry out as many of these prints simultaneously so long as your build tray has the space. The frames are reinforced with 6 ounces of steel. The barrel is then treated with acetone vapor and vinegar, both measures increasing the gun's tensile strength. Then, step by step, Cody showed how all the parts slotted together. Adding the nail and finally slotting the barrel into place, they were presented with the second ever Liberator. They made their way from the warehouse to the ranch, with all cameras pointing at Cody and his plastic gun. He raised his weapon and pulled the trigger once. After shaking hands and receiving congratulations, the BBC reporter asked him, "What happens when the government steps in tomorrow?" Back in 2003, photos of California's coastal erosion were published online. In one of these photos, you could see Barbra Streisand's cliffside home. When she attempted to suppress the photo, she inadvertently drew more attention to it. Her attempted censorship completely backfired, and for her efforts, that ironic phenomenon was labelled the Streisand effect. Cody welcomed the government's interference. If they were to step in and attempt to ban the Wiki Weapon, they would only end up promoting it further. And that's pretty much what happened. Within months of the Liberator's release, Defense Distributed received a letter from the powers that be. It stated that 10 files on DEFCAD's website, including the blueprints for the Liberator, were in violation of ETAR. Put simply, since DEFCAD was globally available, they were seen to be exporting unregistered firearms. As always, Defense Distributed complied with the law and took the files down. But by that point, the files had already been downloaded hundreds of thousands of times, and were already circulating online. 2 years later, and Defense Distributed sued the State Department, arguing that distribution of blueprints was covered by their freedom of speech. In July of 2018, the State Department settled, allowing Defense Distributed to once again publish its designs. 2 months after their victory, Cody was arrested in Taiwan. Accused of paying a minor for sexual acts, he settled the allegation and received 7 years probation as well as 475 hours of community service. The day after his arrest, Cody resigned from Defense Distributed to avoid association of his personal life with the Wiki Weapons movement. So what about the movement? It's been over a decade since the first gun was 3D printed. What impact has it had? As I mentioned, back in 2012, 16 mass shootings set the record for the most within a single year. 10 years later, and that record sits at 690, less than 20 of which involved unregistered ghost guns, and it's unclear if any of them were even 3D printed. While the idea of anyone being able to print a deadly weapon is scary, the statistics suggest that there are easier ways to obtain firearms. The Liberator and other DEFCAD components are far from the first choice of any gun owner, but their success isn't determined by their popularity. The Wiki Weapon succeeds simply by existing, serving as an example of how technology can be used to subvert state control.